Welcome back to Through a Glass Darkly Radio. You're listening to United Public Radio. Intro music was Mark of the Doomslayer by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. And my apologies for the delay. Right as I went live, it said that my stream had been removed from YouTube, even though nothing happened. And that was after Jerry told me that he couldn't even log in to Google because reasons. So anyway, I panicked, and it looks like it's on YouTube. Looks like it's fine, but because I didn't even do anything yet. So I think we're okay. Maybe there's another YouTube stream somewhere where it's just not showing up. But I just want to welcome my guest, Jerry Marzinsky. He's a BA and a master's in education. He is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. Jerry is a commercial pilot, certified scuba diver, and long-distance motorcyclist. He has held positions of second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and assistant scoutmaster. He was awarded the state of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award and the Pima College Apple Award of Teaching Abnormal Psychology. His formal academic training comprises a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. He is the author of An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, and is currently has a private practice in Arizona. So, without further ado, Jerry, welcome. I almost crapped my pants when I saw that. So, especially after you said something, I'm like, oh. But for folks listening, I was briefing Jerry very carefully on kind of what the key words were that we had to dance around and all that stuff, given that YouTube had removed a video already, and I'm already, I'm skating on, I don't have a strike quite yet, but if anything else happens, I get a strike. So we're going to be using some interesting language as we navigate this. So for folks who've watched the channel, you already know Jerry, you already know what he does, but we're going to kind of cover some of that or retread some of that ground, just so that a broader audience kind of knows what Jerry's about. But we're going to get kind of the cliff notes. And then after that, there's some new stuff that we're going to introduce for all the usual followers of Through a Glass Darkly, the channel, in addition to the radio station. So Jerry, woo! Welcome back, my friend.
Oh, Lord, YouTube.
Fun stuff. All right. So paranoid schizophrenics. What are they, and how did you become an expert on counseling them?
Well, through trial and error, really.
And also, can you move the microphone closer to your face?
Okay. Is it better?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So I guess to do the Cliff Notes part, after graduate school, I was hired on at one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet, if not the biggest. There were close to 10,000 patients there when I got there. It was the size of a small city, Milledgeville, Georgia. And
I think you're speaking into your computer. I don't think you're using your headset for some reason. Now, and you're muted now. Still muted. It's actually on the you might have to reconfigure on if you go to settings, you might need, and then go to audio, you might need to just change your mic. And settings should be at the very bottom of the screen. And settings being the StreamYard app. And as Jerry's working on that, welcome back, Philip. Welcome back, Rain Cry 527. No, it's not. Why don't you drop off and just drop back in, Jerry, and then I think it should work. But at that point, I shouldn't have messed with your mojo on that. Yeah, I can't hear you at all. The StreamYard is muting you. That's the problem, because StreamYard doesn't have. It just says that your mic's not connected. There you go. There you go.
Now? Okay.
It's like 10x better. All right. Excellent. Excellent. All right. You're working at the largest psychiatric facility in Georgia, if not the region, right?
Well, yeah, if not on the planet, it was massive. And, going through school, they basically said the voices schizophrenics were hearing were auditory hallucinations. They didn't say anything much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, hallucinations, they're like, I thought it would be like random garbage, like word salad, not make any sense whatsoever. But that's not what I saw. Once I got onto the front lines, a lot of things were very different from what they taught in the universities. And it was disillusion after disillusion.
Mm-hmm.
I'd virtually been lied to in a lot of circumstances. So once I got there, the one of the first things we were taught in the university is that the schizophrenia is due to a chemical imbalance of the brain. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I believe that. I mean, why would they lie to me about something like that? I went in there believing that. But
well, I mean, it's not necessarily that they're lying. It's just that that's what they think. That's what they think it is. But when you dug deeper,
they knew better. They knew better. That's what really grates me. This chemical imbalance theory garbage, total garbage, was started by a pharmaceutical company named Eli Lilly back in the 70s when they came out with Prozac. They had no idea why their antidepressants worked or at all. So they made something up. They just go, oh well, it's a chemical and it has some effect on the person, and so it must be some kind of chemical imbalance in the neurotransmitters. So they just went with that, and then the pharmaceutical industry and got the universities to start teaching that. It was not true at the time. There was no evidence for it. They went with it anyway. They knew it was wrong. They did it to sell drugs, and I didn't know that at the time. But what I did notice is that if these people, paranoid schizophrenics, have a chemical imbalance of their brain, then you would think that they would have some kind of test that they would be giving them at the start to find out what chemicals were out of balance or by how much.
Yeah, they have what, 16 neurotransmitters or something like that.
Something like 23 or something. There's a bunch of them.
So, but like what that balance should be in percentage, proportion, right, things like that.
What's out of balance?
If you ask somebody that question, what would they tell you?
You asked a psychiatrist what was out of balance?
Yeah,
they wouldn't know.
Or they'd have no idea. Percentage?
They'd have no idea. No idea. So they never took a baseline, and I noticed that. I'm like, if the brain, if mental illness is caused by, and now they're spreading it to everything. If mental illness is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain, then you think they would have some kind of baseline. They'd give some kind of lab work or blood work or EEG or EKG or some kind of objective test to measure what's out of balance or by how much.
They never gave one. I never saw them give one. In the 7 years I worked at that hospital, I never saw them give any kind of test to measure what was out of balance or by how much. And then looking deeper into it, they had no idea. They don't even know
And
what the
that's not,
chemical balance of the brain should be.
and that's not to say that some of the things that they use don't tamp down symptoms or don't work in to some extent for different maladies. It's just that they don't, in many cases, know why they work.
Well, they didn't know why any antipsychotic drugs worked for over 10 years after they came out. They had no idea. But what they're treating are only symptoms. They're treating, they're not getting at the cause at all.
Mm-hmm.
They're just treating and tamping down the symptoms. So a lot of these antipsychotic drugs are like major tranquilizers. They calm the person down. It turns out the voices don't want them calmed down. So one of the first things I noticed was that when the patients that I was working with were listening to the voices, they were getting in a lot of trouble. And there seemed to be a correlation between listening to the voices and getting into fights, quitting school, doing stuff that got them in trouble, or going off their medications. And I didn't know till later that it was the voices telling them to get off those medications. So I started asking them. Nobody knew what the voices were telling them. And I was curious. You go, well, what are these voices? And you ask the staff and they go, oh, well, they're just hallucinations. Just blow them off, And that's what they were all saying. Just blow them off. They're hallucinations. We know what they are. We're not going to look into it any further. Don't even worry about it. They're hallucinations.
And are these only auditory hallucinations, or also are there ever visual?
Oh yeah, there's visual ones too. But
and
the most
what
common,
does medical science say? Does it say both, or does it just say auditory?
Well, the majority of them are auditory.
Okay.
There's also a mixture of auditory and visual. And sometimes they're heavily visual. But usually auditory it comes along with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So the visual hallucinations were much less than the auditory. Virtually all of them heard voices of some kind, and they didn't want to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at what's going on. There's no, what do you call it? There's no positive outcome for these people to talk about their voices. Look what happens when they do. Their friends break away. They go, oh, something's wrong with you. You're crazy. You're possessed. I don't want to deal with this. I can't see what you're hearing. I can't hear what you're hearing. You're weirding me out. And they lose their friends. They tell their family. Their family gets all upset and hauls them off to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist tells them, well, you're schizophrenic. You're crazy. It's a life sentence. You've got to take these horrible drugs for the rest of your life. If they don't take them, then they lock them into a psych hospital. So there's no positive outcome for the most part of telling anybody about these voices. So most of them keep them to themselves as much as they can when they realize that other people don't hear them. And if they get them when they're young, they think everybody hears them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they find out they don't. So and one of the things psychiatrists ask them, they bring them in they medicate them, and those drugs for the most part do not get rid of the voices. They weaken them, but they will not get rid of them. Very seldom did I see them completely get rid of the voices. Very seldom. They just weaken them, and the voices don't like that. These things they're conscious entities. They can see everything the patient sees. They can hear everything the patient hears. They speak to these people in full sentences. Like, I remember when I first started seeing that, it was like listening to one side of a telephone conversation. You can hear the person talking, but you can't hear the person on the other end of the line. Okay. So it wasn't word salad. They were carrying on coherent conversations with these voices that they were hearing. They were arguing with them. They were cussing at them. They were trying to reason with them. And if you came around while they were doing that, they'd shut up because they know that wasn't normal. Or they would tell you, "Oh, I was just thinking to myself," something like that. They cover them up. So the psychiatrist would medicate them for it, and they quickly found out that when they returned to the psychiatrist, if they still reported they were hearing voices, the psychiatrist would either increase their medications or change them to a different medication. Okay, and the side effects of those medications are horrible. They're just absolutely horrible. So they didn't want to take them, and I'm kind of try to do this in a chronological order. So it was everybody felt they knew what the voices were. They were hallucinations. Nobody was asking any questions. Nobody was curious about, and there were hundreds of staff there. Nobody was curious about what these voices were telling them. And I went, well, that's odd. Why don't they ask them what the voices are telling them? Why don't they look into what these things are? They were not the least bit interested. None of them. You're not going to look into something that you feel you already know. And the universities are teaching their hallucinations. That's what they're teaching in graduate school. That's what they're teaching in medical school. So they're going, okay, we know what they are. They're hallucinations. They don't make any sense. But they do.
Have they ever done like what is it? EEG studies, or EEG is probably not the electronic.
Yeah, they have. And what was interesting is they found like a split second before the voices spoke, there was an electrical signal in the brain.
And this doesn't happen a split second before you're having a normal conversation, someone.
Oh, I'm sure it would. There's kind of like the impulse to speak, and then you speak. So there was a electrical firing in the brain, like they were hearing somebody's voice from the outside.
So you're saying in a conversation, if I'm talking to you, you say something to me, there's going to be a split second impulse, and then I'll speak. So right. It's like in the absence of having that counterparty externally, they're seeing this in paranoid schizophrenia.
Right. So they saw that, which I found very interesting. So I started asking these patients what these voices were telling them. They didn't want to talk about it because it's already caused them a lot of trouble. It took me almost 2 years to figure out how to talk to them about the voices and get an answer. And I did that, piece by piece. One patient would tell me something about the voices. I'd remember it. And then when I'd ask another one, I'd say, well, I know this much about the voices. What else can you tell me? Because our job was to watch these people, and that if they were starting to get out of control, to turn them into psychiatry, to drug them. So they didn't trust psychology. They didn't trust counselors. They didn't trust psychologists, because if they were getting out of control, they would end up in front of the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist would dump more of these horrible meds into them. Right? So the big thing was getting them to trust you. It was like they don't call them paranoid schizophrenics for nothing. They're paranoid. They don't trust people. So it was bit by bit by bit, over years, where one would tell me this, another one would tell me that, another one would tell me this. And then I'd check that out with a number of other ones and say, is this true? Do you experience the same thing? And then one of the patients, apparently his voices got angry at me and got him to go tell a psychiatrist that I was asking questions about the voices. Right? When the psychiatrist found that out, I got called into his office on the red carpet and told, you will not ask these people about their voices, their hallucinations. What you're doing is making them worse. You're reinforcing their hallucinations by asking them questions about it. That happened twice at the state hospital. They did not want you even looking into it. So I had to be very careful after that. Just ask fewer questions, make sure that I wasn't upsetting the patient, and it was very slow going. But the more I learned about them, the more I could tell these other patients, like, okay, this is what I know about the voice and so far. And they would see, well, hey, this guy's trying to figure out what's going on. None of the other staff know this stuff. So one of the first patterns that I noticed is that these voices were consistently negative. They were always telling the patients negative stuff. You're no good, you're rotten, you're ugly, you're stupid, nobody likes you, you're gross, your parents don't like you, you name it. Anything negative that you could think of, these things would be telling them. They wanted them upset. They were telling them things that would make them upset. And a lot of what they were telling them were lies. So the first pattern I saw is that these things were negative. Regular hallucinations are all over the place. Medical hallucinations are positive, they're negative, they're in the middle, they're all over. They run the entire spectrum. They're not predictable. You never know what you're going to get. These things were consistently negative. So my question was, and after talking to, scores of these people, they were all saying the same thing. Yeah, the voices are negative. They don't say anything good. And if they're telling you anything good, it's only to trap you later. But the vast majority, 98% of what they say is negative, horrible rundowns. They're putting the person down, calling them names. They're abusing them, insulting them. So my question was, if these things are hallucinations, why aren't they random like all other hallucinations? Why aren't they all over the place? Why don't they sometimes say something good, just say neutral stuff, bad stuff? Why aren't they all over the place like regular hallucinations? They're not. They're consistently negative. The next question was, what holds them on such a negative pattern? Why aren't they negative? What holds them within that negative bandwidth? How come they're not all over the place? Right? So here's the first pattern. Okay? And hallucinations don't run patterns. So I got more curious. And then, in talking with some of the other patients I had on my ward, I found out that they didn't go to church. They didn't go to Bible study. They didn't go to the kind of groupings that the preachers would have. They would have like ice cream socials. These guys sat on the dingy ward instead of going down and listening to music and talking to the other patients, having cake and ice cream. They stayed on the ward and stared on the wall, stared at the ceiling. I mean, it was like. So I noticed that when I was doing rounds on the ward, when they were holding these ice cream socials, it was only the schizophrenics that were on the ward. All the rest went down. All the other different patients went down. And I went, that's odd. I noticed it the first time, and then the second time I saw it again. So I started asking them questions. Well, why don't you go down there with, to the ice cream social and get some cake and ice cream and socialize? Well, I don't want to socialize, and I don't like church, and I don't believe in God, and church has never helped me. Prayers have never helped me. They were anti-religious. Then one of them came in one time, and he was talking about the voices came, and he repeated the Lord's Prayer, and he said the voices reacted to the 23rd Psalm. It was the 23rd Psalm, like worms thrown onto a hot frying pan. And I went, that's interesting. So I already saw that the schizophrenics were pretty much anti-religious. And then I started asking them, I said, what happens when you go to church? They said, well, it broke into 3 categories. If the voices were weak, they would shut up in church. If they were moderate, they would get louder, and they would mock the preacher and say, this is garbage, make fun of the preacher, get loud so the patient couldn't hear what the preacher was saying, and just kind of generally try to block what the preacher was saying. And if they were very strong, they would drive the patient out of the church, just run him completely out. Mm-hmm. So when this one patient came to me and said the voices react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan, I started handing out the 23rd Psalm to other patients and say, when you hear the voices, say this and come back and tell me what they're saying. Mm-hmm. The voices were very upset over the 23rd Psalm. They did not like it. And this was consistent. So the voices were anti-religious. You know, what kind of hallucination would be anti-religious? You know, they did
at least
not
consistently.
Consistently, right. They were anti-religious. You know, another consistent pattern, and there were like pattern after pattern after pattern were coming out year after year after year. But these are some of the first ones I noticed. They want the patient to be upset. The things that they say to them are designed to get them upset. The negative emotion they create are designed to get them upset and keep them upset. Yeah. And they will wait for something to go wrong, and then they'll kind of like pour gasoline on the fire. You know, start blaming the person and just whipping them into a frenzy. You know, and schizophrenics, when they get angry, they get very strong. They get supernaturally strong. You know, they can cause a lot of damage.
Can you actually give an example where, you know, somebody lost control? I mean, if you have an example of like a small woman that like couldn't be subdued by like
I got an example. Let me put these patterns on hold, and I'll give you one. This happened in the Florence prison in one of the high security blocks. Okay. The guards wanted to move this schizophrenic patient. He was a big guy. He was a big, strong guy. He was locked. He was in a cell by himself. They wanted to move him to another cell for some reason. Right? So they come up to him and they ask, okay, you know, cuff up, we're moving you to another cell. And he says, I'm not moving anywhere. You know, they said, you know, cuff up, or we're moving you. He said, no, I'm not going anywhere. You know, so rather than turn off the water and not feed him until he was ready to come out of that cell, they were doing their macho confrontation stuff. You don't come out of that cell, we're gonna break out the pepper spray and we're gonna douse you down good with it. And they were carrying around like these look like these quart cans of pepper spray. And I don't know if you ever had any contact with that stuff. It's nasty. It's very nasty.
NBC training in the Army, they make us take a big whiff.
Yeah, so you know what it's like.
Well, CS gas, but it's close enough. Yeah.
Well, the pepper spray burns. You know, it burns. So you know they break out their pepper spray and they tell you, okay, cuff up, or we're gonna douse you. So he's sitting on his bed and he said, you know, he's mocking them, he's making fun of them, he's cursing at them, and they break out the pepper spray, they stick it through the hatch in the door. He puts a towel around his head, and they just douse him with it. I mean, they put in like 2 cans of that stuff, or and he still wouldn't come out. So some of it got out of the hatch, and it was affecting the guards who shot it in there. So they say, okay, now come on out. He said, no, I'm not. You come in and get me, you fairies, you bunch of sissy ass. So he's cussing them and calling them all kinds of nasty names and stuff. So they said, you come on out there. We're going to go get the stun gun. And he's like, go get your stun gun, you bunch of sissies, you bunch of fags. I mean, he's just letting them have it. So they go get the stun gun. And these are the ones that shot these little arrows. There was a little thin wire attached to it. and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the little thing would go bury itself in their skin, and then it was like 50,000 volts, and I don't know how much amperage. I have no idea. But I would watch it knock down the biggest prisoners. I mean, it was these big guys, like 200, 250 pounds. They would boom. They were out. They hit the ground. You know, this guy just stood there and shook. He just stood in the middle of his cell and quivered. So they got a second stun gun, and they shot him with that. So while one was recharging, the other one was discharging. 13 times they did that to him, one after another. When one of those would have knocked a regular guy down, he didn't go down. He just stood there and quivered like he had his finger in a wire socket or something. And finally, the warden came down and said, "They're going to get me for cruel and unusual punishment. Stop this." So they stopped it, and they said, "You come out of there." Now, this was a 3-tier prison building, so there were 2 tiers of cells. All the prisoners watching this. This was like the the grand finale for them. This was like the Belmont races or something, and they were all watching this down, so the guards couldn't
Yeah,
lose.
it's a spectacle, and it undermines the guard's authority. Right.
Right. So they were real interested in watching how this was going to end up. So they told this guy, "You come out of there, or we're going to go get the dog." Now they have these trained attack dogs that are just trained to rip these people to pieces. I mean, they're nasty dogs. They're trained to attack. So, and they cost a lot of money. So they went and got the attack dog. They said, "Now you come out of there. We're going to sick the dog on you." Said, "Go ahead and sick your dog on me, you bunch of fairies." You cussing at them, putting them down, mocking them. And all the other prisoners are hearing this. So the dog handler gets the dog ready, and it's on a long leash. They crack the cell, and he's sitting on his bed. They open the door and tell him, sick him. And he throws his hand up in front of his face like this. The dog clamps onto it and bites down to the bone. And then he pulls his arm up and looks the dog right in the eye, and he goes, "Sit." And the dog sat, but it didn't let go of his arm. And he's gushing blood. And then he starts petting like, "Good puppy, good puppy." And everybody outside the cell is like going, "What in the blazes is going on in there?" So they start pulling on the rope, and the dog doesn't let go of his arm. And the dog drags him out. They drag the dog out, and the dog drags him out. And then they just beat the crap out of him. Supernaturally strong, over and over. I mean, I watched one little 150-pound inmate just bounce 2 big prison guards around the inside of a cell like they were popcorn. They get supernaturally strong, and there's no rational accounting for that strength. Now, I did talk to a devil worshiper once, and I asked him about that.
And was this somebody who was in one of the prisons that you were watching, that you were in, the devil worshiper?
Yeah,
Okay.
The devil worshiper. I was a little leery of him, and he had a what's this guy saying? He's worried about. I missed it.
He's just saying the dog. The cruel and unusual part. Did the cruel and unusual allegation from the warden come before or after the attack dog?
Before. It came.
He's saying, wasn't the attack dog cruel and unusual itself?
Well, they had no other way to get him out of there, and nobody was going to go in there and try to get him out.
Yeah.
So by the time this was all over, there were like 20 or 30 guards out there, waiting to get this guy out of the cell, and they just overwhelmed him once he got out. So, and that supernatural strength is true for all schizophrenics I've seen. When they get upset and they get into a fight, supernaturally strong. I had a couple of them tell me that when they liked having the voices in the prison setting because the voices would fight for them. They wouldn't be doing the fighting. The voices would be doing the fighting. They'd be controlling the guy, and they seldom lost a fight. Matter of fact, the prisoners would the gangsters in some cases would stop some of their gang members who were psychotic from taking those medicines so they could use them as human torpedoes against other gang members. So they get the guy good and paranoid, and they say, "Hey, that guy over there, who's an enemy of this one gang, that guy over there is he's plotting to kill you. You better go do something about it before he gets to you." And they would sick him on their enemies. And the guy was crazy. So what'd they do? They lock him down. Fill him full of meds, lock him down. So it was.
So some of the signs. So some of the signs you were going through. Some of the signs that they had.
So,
before I keep interrupting you with questions.
So what they did, they foster and create negative emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed is that after the voices left, these guys were completely drained of energy. They were so drained of energy that I remember this one guy that I had an appointment with him. He didn't show up. And then, when I caught up and I asked him why, he said, "Well, the voices were attacking me all night. I couldn't even get out of bed for breakfast." So I noticed there was a marked lack of energy after the voices showed up. And I even had a number of patients tell me I can even feel my energy leaving when the voices are attacking me. And this was consistent. It was like the voices come, they attack these people, and then their energy is gone. But they don't notice it. They notice the energy is gone, but they don't attribute it to the voices, which was very strange. So I would talk to them about it. It'd be like, have you noticed that after the voices come, you don't have any energy left? And they said, "Oh, well, come to think about it, that's true." They hadn't thought about it before. And I said, "Well, every time the voices show up, your energy completely disappears, right?" And they go, "Yeah."
Mm-hmm.
And they go, "Well, you've heard the voices thousands of times while you've been struggling with this, and every time the voices showed up, your energy was gone, right?" "Yeah." "Well, where'd your energy go? You didn't use it, did you?" They go, "No." "Well, where'd it go?" "Well, I don't know." An overwhelming number of them, maybe 75, 80% of them, could not make the connection between the voices showing up and their energy disappearing. Right? So I'd ask them about it. I'd say, "Okay, you noticed that when the voices come, your energy disappears, and you didn't use it because you were laying in bed all day, right?" "Yeah." "Well, where'd your energy go?" "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, this has happened to you thousands of times, and every time the voices come, your energy disappears, right?" And they go, "Yeah, that happens." "Well, you didn't use it. Where'd it go?" "Well, I don't know." They say, "Well, if you stuck your hand in a fire and you got burned, what burned you?" Well, they'd know the fire burned them right away. It was the fire. Well, if you stuck your hand 1,000 times in the fire and each time you got burned, what's burning you? The fire. Okay, they could figure that out. And then I'd go, "Well, if the voices come 1,000 times and every time that they came, you didn't have any energy left, where do you think your energy went?" Now, a small number of them, maybe 10, 15%, would say, "The voices took it?" They'd figure it out. Now,
how often do these voices come? Was there any sort of pattern? Like, was it more often at night? Was it more often during certain seasons of the year?
They come more often after sunset. They get strongest between 3 and 4 in the morning.
Yeah, makes sense. Witching hour.
Yeah. Now they come randomly. They'll come when something goes wrong. They show up and they start dumping gasoline on the fire. This guy insulted you. Well, you should do this to him and get in a fight with him and do this and do that, and how dare him. So it's like they just make a molehill into a mountain. They want to make it as bad as possible. Right? Now they come at different times for different people. Some people hear them all the time. Some people they come and go. And they become almost like they're diabolical friends. I mean, I had one guy. He was a stock. He worked on Wall Street in the stock market, and he was making like a 6-figure salary. Had a house, was married, and he was hearing voices. He was using a lot of cocaine, and some other drugs, and he started hearing voices. He hid it from his wife for their entire marriage. I said, "How'd you do that?" He goes, "Well, I would just go out to the garage and I would talk to them, and if she showed up, I'd say I was just talking to myself. Otherwise, she didn't even know that he was hearing voices." So I worked with him for about.
Where did you work with him? In a prison or in a?
No, it was in the prison. This guy was in the prison.
How did he end up in prison as a stockbroker?
Well, he started using drugs and he started doing all kinds of crazy stuff. He started robbing people and selling drugs and doing all kinds of stuff. He ended up homeless on the streets of New York City with the voices, and he preferred that. He wanted to be homeless. He wanted to be eating out of trash cans. That's what he wanted. And the voices loved it too. So he would know what restaurants were throwing out what kind of food at what time. He'd go check the trash cans. So after working with him for 6 months, we got rid of his voices. Back then I was just learning how to do it. And it was like trial and error. A lot of trial and error. And
real quick, we talked about kind of when the voices typically come. What sorts of individuals seem to be targeted by it, or is it just completely random?
No, it's not random. Usually it's people who have been severely, physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. They go after the wounded people. And then
kind of like pedophiles, right? Or
they're like sharks in the ocean.
Sharks, right?
Like sharks that smell blood. It's almost like they can sense these people. They hit us all. I mean, every time you have a negative thought about something that it just startles you, it just comes out of nowhere, and it's like, where did that come from? I mean, everybody, that's them. They're around us all the time. I've had a number of people tell me, well, I was standing on a bridge and I had a thought to jump off. Had a preacher tell me once he was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, had a thought to jump over the canyon, into the canyon. Yeah. You look at the suicide rate in the U.S., it's almost 50,000 people a year now. And that all of those suicide attempts are preceded by a thought. Kill yourself. And that's what these voices are telling these schizophrenic patients a majority of the time. Just kill yourself. You're no good. Nobody likes you. You're never going to amount to nothing. Just give everybody some relief and just kill yourself. Yeah. So these are diabolical entities. Another name for them is archons. They're the archons. Right? So they get louder after sunset. They will not be ignored. I don't know how many times I've seen psychiatry tell patients, just ignore them. They're just hallucinations. Just ignore them. They get louder when they're ignored.
Mm-hmm.
They foster self-destructive behavior. They get the person to shoot themselves in the foot, to sabotage themselves, to quit school, to quit their jobs, to take off and just hit the streets and be homeless. they foster isolation. They don't want people. They don't want them to be around people. They don't want them to be around their mothers or their wives or their people who are trying to help them. They want to keep them away from them. You know, and they push for more and more control. So what they're doing is actually pushing the person's original personality. They're pushing it out of the way and slowly taking control if the person allows that. So, you know, the most schizophrenics are usually fighting with them. But, you know, what's so spooky about them is they sound just like the person's normal thoughts, the everyday thoughts that go through, you know, thousands of thoughts that go through your mind every day. You know, there's no like, you know, we are the voices and we're evil, and there's nothing like that. They sound just like the regular thoughts that go through your mind, only the content and the intention are very different. The content is always negative. The intention is always negative. You know, it's not something that the person would wish upon themselves. You know, so they manipulate perception. They go, you know, these people are watching you, or the person is walking down the sidewalk, and you know, some people start laughing over on one side of the street, and the voices are telling them, well, they're laughing at you. You know, they call it ideas of reference, where they think everything happening around them is being controlled and pitted against them somehow. You know? So they also have access to the patient's memory. So they're energetic. Okay, so thoughts are energetic. Feelings are energetic. Memory is energetic. These things are energy. You know, just like our spirit is energy. You know, your feelings are energy. Your thoughts are energy. It's all energy. These are energy. So they can go into your mind, and they can pull up virtually every rotten thing you've ever done, and they can rub it in your face. You know, they know about it. You know? And they throw it in their face and get them agitated and angry and guilty. And once they start generating that negative emotional energy, then they start feeding off it. Okay? So you look at what's happening right now, you know, in the world right now. You look at all these crazy Western politicians trying to start a war. You got over 600,000 Ukrainians have been killed on the battlefield. And here's this moron we have in office right now, sending billions of dollars over there to a war that's already lost, you know, and talking about stealing the Russians' money and sending it to Ukraine to kill Russians with. These people are insane. They are totally insane. And if you look at the patterns that I'm talking about here, those patterns are the same friggin' stuff that's coming over the mainstream media in the Western world right now. You know, the same stuff. Yeah. So these are the archons on a macro huge level, macroscopic level. I believe these people are possessed with these things. You know, they have they're interested only in money and power and themselves. Yeah. So once these patterns started appearing, and there were like 23 patterns. Okay, they're on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. You can go see them. Okay. Now, if these things are running patterns, they can't be hallucinations, as the psychiatric mafia insists. Hallucinations don't run patterns, especially repeatable, consistent patterns.
Yeah. And by the way, not to quickly interrupt, but it's slightly past the bottom of the hour. If you're just joining, you're listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio. I'm here with Jerry Marzinsky, and we are talking about parasitic entities that have been associated with paranoid schizophrenia. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Jerry. I just had to
no
get
problem.
in there before. By the way, this is a good time to interject too. So one listener, viewer, I'm just going to read this out loud so folks on the radio can hear it. I have a question. Can you please ask Jerry his talk on attachments with schizophrenia Does that also include PTSD? If so, what would be the best way to help someone with a chronic PTSD outburst? And I think there's also been a question somewhat related to that. How did you get rid of these voices? So if you can kind of somehow address.
Okay, let me address that first one first.
Okay.
PTSD and schizophrenia are not even in the same ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, people who have serious PTSD may also have schizophrenia, but most of the time they appear separate in a lot of patients.
Can
Okay.
PTSD or traumatic experiences open you up to these
Yes.
attacked by these entities? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But a lot of people have PTSD and don't hear voices or are not schizophrenic. Okay. Now the best way to handle PTSD is with a new therapy that came out in Australia called the MACE energy method. Okay. And I was talking about energy earlier. So if these voices are energetic entities, I mean, they're speaking to these people in complete sentences, coherent sentences, and everything they're saying is to bring the patient down, to knock him down, to degrade him, to insult him. You know, so you can see where they're going with it. That's what they want. Okay, and they're using every tactic in the book to do that. Since they're energetic, they can go in and they can see their thoughts. Um, so they can actually somehow blend with the person's spirit. I remember when I was shocked when one day I was telling a patient, well, tell your voice is this. And the patient said, I don't have to. They can see you. They can hear everything you're saying. You know? And I'm like, wow, that took me back. Okay. So what psychiatry is doing is they're using a physical substance to try to cure an energetic problem.
Mm-hmm.
So all they're doing is drugging the body. They're drugging the brain. They're not getting at the cause of the problem, which is these energetic entities, or um,
They're
traumatic.
managing the symptoms, but they're not attacking the root cause.
No, they're not attacking the real cause. So it would be
Which,
like,
which is to say, if somebody's on these meds, they probably shouldn't take it. They probably shouldn't stop taking the meds because it does help tamp down the voices. It's just if they can be cured from it, um, and stop hearing the voices, in
well,
the long run, the
yeah.
meds probably aren't great for you.
No, they're not. They should only be used temporarily while other methods. Again, the MACE energy method is energetic. The therapist does not have to know anything about the trauma. It works
Mhm.
anyway. So what psychiatry is doing is kind of going, you get a magnet, and the normal person can't see these voices. They can't hear these voices. They can't feel them. They can't touch them. They can't, for all practical purposes, the normal person can't has no evidence that they exist. So it's kind of like same thing with a magnetic field. You get a big magnet with a strong magnetic field. You can't see that magnetic field. You can't touch it. You can't hear it. You can't feel it. For all practical purposes, it doesn't exist. You can't sense it with any of your senses. You know.
Mhm.
So you get a jar full of iron filings and you put it on that magnet. Now you can see the outline of that magnetic field and what it looks like. Well, that's what these patterns are. These patterns are the operational definition of what the voices are. Okay? Anybody can see them. They're not like what the psychiatry. So, first they started out with, it's a genetic problem. It's the genes, and they got away with that for what, a decade or more. Oh yeah, it's the genetics. It's got to be the genetics, and the geneticist, you know, most of them aren't interested in schizophrenia. Finally, some of them
Mhm.
started investigating it. And they're going, we don't see any genetic marker for schizophrenia. Yeah. So they shot that one down. So here they don't have a cause, so they make one up. They never had any proof that schizophrenia was genetic. There might be a predisposition, but then again, there's other things that could cause that predisposition.
Now, is John Mace the person who created the method?
Sean Mace is the person who created it.
Okay.
So what psychiatry is doing is like dumping, Thorazine on a magnetic field and expecting it to go away. It's not going to go away with physical drugs. Yeah. Now, Mace is working with energy. And this system works great for PTSD, because what Mace found is that trauma is stored as kind of alive energy that's trapped in the subconscious mind. All right. He has found a way to get in there and get it out, and he calls it a negative identity. Once that is gone, that negative identity, so something may have happened to a person when they were young, and they decide as a result of this trauma that I'm no good, I'm worthless, and that's a very common one. I run into that all the time. Okay? Once we go back to that trauma and discreate it, get rid of it, and that negative identity that's stuck in there, that feeling of I'm no good is gone. It's just gone, and a bunch of energy is also released, because it takes a lot of energy to hold that trauma in the subconscious mind. Right? So it's constantly draining the person's energy, because it's that stuff is not buried dead; it's buried alive. So you can go to causisminstitute.com, and there's a list of causism therapists there, Mace therapists there. I've never seen anything work like this stuff. I mean, I've been in the field for probably close to 50 years at this point, and this stuff gets rid of traumas within an hour. They're gone. They're completely gone. The person remembers the horrible thing that happened to them, but there's no emotional charge with it. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I remember it, but that's it. There's no agonizing over it. There's no feeling of being worthless anymore. It's gone. So this stuff works great for PTSD. It also helps depending on how far gone the schizophrenic is. I mean, there's some of them that are so far gone, nobody's ever going to reach them again. So the earlier you can catch them, the better. Especially if they're willing, if they realize the first thing they have to realize is that these voices are not them. Because the voices want them to believe that these thoughts, these ideas that they're putting into their thought stream are who they are. Because we experience thought as being in the head. We just normally believe, well, every thought that I have belongs to me. It's mine. That's far from the truth. That's very far from the truth. Most of your thoughts do not belong to you. They're coming in from either a negative or a positive place. So your mind is like a radio receiver. It will pick up on the frequency it's tuned to. So prisoners are tuned to a very low frequency. They're hearing a lot of negative stuff. Real religious people are tuned to a higher frequency. Right? So it's all got to do with frequency. What Mace does, it goes out there and it removes that negative energy and returns it back to the person. So after the session, they can feel calmer, they feel more energy, and you ask them, well, okay, how do you feel now? Do you feel worthless now? They go, no, it's gone. So it's great for PTSD. So Mace works with energy. And it works for all kinds of stuff. regular psychotherapy. I mean, I've been licensed for years by the state. It was a waste of time. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Waste of time for this particular melody.
Well, it's a waste of time
Paranoid
for
schizophrenia.
most.
Okay.
And they go something
I'm
happens.
dancing. I'm dancing on a wire here, Jerry. Dancing on a wire.
Well, this is my experience.
Yeah. Okay. In your experience.
In my
Okay.
experience, and I had a lot of it. I had a lot of therapeutic training, a lot of counseling theory. When you get out to the real world, few people are getting any better.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of talk, and people aren't getting better. And you look at the statistics. People as a whole. I mean, right now there's more psychiatrists, there's more psychologists, there's more psychiatric drugs on the planet than at any other time in human history. And look at the mess we're in. There's more schizophrenics. There's more mentally ill. There's more prisons are overflowed. They shut down the state hospitals. Now the prisons are the state hospitals, and they're not doing a good job. They're not doing a good job of treating these people at all. So they lock them up because they can't they can't think, they can't survive. They so they go out and they start stealing stuff and using drugs. Right? They get thrown into prison, and then they're brutalized. They're hearing voices. They come out in much worse shape than they ever went in. Yeah. They give them $50 and said, "Okay, you've done your time." I can't hear you.
Sorry. Lisa Whaler is saying, Jerry, thank you for your work, and thank you for introducing me to Lynn Monet. I don't know if that means anything to you, but
Yeah, Lynn was a nurse who was able to see spirits from the time she was a little girl, and her mom didn't try to talk her out of it. So she was a nurse, and she did an internship on a psych ward. I've done a number of interviews with her, and she could actually see these things, these voices, when she was on the psych ward, and she would tell stories of what they looked like and how they affected people. And one time she flicked one off, and the person was cured.
what do these things look like, according to her?
Well, she drew pictures of them. She said they were like a bunch of distorted. They were like grapes all stuck together with distorted faces. And the person who was infected with them was hearing a lot of different voices.
Okay, interesting. And they would just glom onto these people, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. In terms of, kind of people who are targeted, people who've had lots of trauma, things like that, who I guess are easier pickings than, people who've not had horrible experiences. Any other thing? You alluded to drug use and kind of the onset of schizophrenia or schizophrenia-like symptoms, or just hearing voices. If you are on certain drugs or you use prolonged use of certain drugs, can you go into a little bit of that?
Yeah. Methamphetamine is one of the most dangerous drugs out there. I've seen more people go psychotic on meth than on any other drug I've ever seen. The prison is full of them. People who started using meth, and then they start hearing voices, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's just a hallucination. It'll go away when I come down," and it does. And that may happen 15, 20, 100 times, and then one day the voices don't go away. They're there permanently, and they're just as schizophrenic, just as crazy as anybody in the psych hospitals. The meth does something to open them up.
Mm-hmm. Probably wears down their defenses, things like that.
Something like that. It opens them up. There's scores of prisoners who went psychotic on meth. It's a very dangerous drug. Ouija boards are another one. I've seen people go psychotic on Ouija boards where the voice goes from, the Ouija boards aren't toys. They're very dangerous. Yeah.
Can you go more into that, like an example of that, like where you saw that happen?
Well, I talked to one person where they said, they were talking to some spirit over the Ouija board, carrying on conversations with them for a good while, and then this whatever they were speaking to started appearing in their head. They could hear the voice in their head. Yeah. They are not toys. You never know who you're speaking with.
What about tarot cards? That's actually a good question.
Well, I don't know a lot about tarot cards. I know some people who play with them, and they looked okay to me.
Mm-hmm.
The one time that somebody predicted something on me with tarot cards, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that surprised me, but it happened. So I don't know. I don't know about tarot cards, but Ouija boards are very dangerous. Right. Now I have some transcripts here.
Yeah, so this is the new stuff we talked about. I alluded to in the very beginning. Why don't you just introduce what this is when you received it? Because I think it's hot off the press is not an accurate statement.
Oh, no. This happened back in 2002. And it happened with a prisoner who had, by the time we were done, he had completely recovered. His voices were gone. Right. So this is when I first met him. He came in from another unit with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. When I first called him in, he appeared nervous. He looked beat up. He looked haggard. He was thin. He was wary. He was hesitant to speak. I asked him if he was on psych meds, and I knew he was because I had his chart. He admitted it, and I asked him, "Do you hear voices?" And there was a guarded response of no. I could tell he wasn't telling the truth, and he got progressively more nervous. I said, "It says here on your record that you were hearing them at one time." I asked him, "When did they start?" He said, "When I was 13." So he'd been hearing these voices since he was 13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I asked him, "Did they start suddenly?" And I asked him, "How did they start off?" It was obvious that nobody had questioned him about his voices before. It was like, so he wasn't used to talking about them. So he said they started off telling me to do little things, and I've heard that before too. They start off. Sometimes they start off suddenly. They just boom, they're there. But other times they start off like somebody driving a new car and just playing with it. It's like,
does this happen to people in like later life without substance abuse issues?
Yeah,
my understanding is most schizophrenia kind of onsets early adulthood, but
yeah, around 25. I have no idea why that is. So,
but there are cases where someone might be in their 60s and something happens, or is that ever happen?
It's unusual, but I imagine it would happen. Usually it starts off, 25 or 30. Sometimes even earlier than that. I was surprised at how many young kids. I mean, real young kids. When I was working in the emergency rooms doing psych crisis, we had to cover the children's unit, and there were kids in there that were 6 and 7 years old hearing voices already. It shocked me. So I was asking this guy. He said they started off by telling me to do little things. I said, "Did they eventually work up to telling you to do bigger things?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What were the things they worked up to telling you to do?" He said, "Mostly they told me other people were going to hurt me and to watch out for other guys." So here comes the paranoia stuff. People are out to get you. They're going to stab you in the back. They're watching you. They're plotting against you. they're creating that paranoia that generates the fear and that negative emotion that they feed off of. Right? And they're breaking them off from other people. They're breaking them off from contact with other people. They don't
Jerry, I hate to come in their defense, but if you've ever worked in corporate, those are actually very healthy instincts.
I have worked in corporate.
And those are very healthy instincts.
Well, matter of fact, when I got out of the
yeah.
prison, I was waiting for some staff. I was working as a contractor with the hospitals, and I was waiting to get stabbed in the back, and it never happened. I'm like, okay, where are they? When's it going to hit? When are they going to come and get me? 'Cause it was like in the prison, it didn't matter how well you did, or they were always stabbing you in the back. Somebody was stabbing you in the back. I didn't find that working in the emergency rooms. For the most part, it was like if you did your job, they pretty much left you alone.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it depends on context for sure.
Yeah.
But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just had to put that in there.
So he says, well, they started working me up to tell me to do bigger things. I asked him, what did they do if you ignored them? He said they got louder. Now this is consistent. If I kept ignoring him, they got angry. They have never, ever gone away for any length of time since they first came. They constantly bother me. I tried to kill myself 2 times. I asked him, how did you kill yourself? How did you try to kill yourself, and what happened? He said, both times I tried to hang myself. One time I went way out in the middle of deep woods, about a mile from the nearest road. And I hung a rope on a tree. There was no one around. I put the rope around my neck, and I was hanging when a hunter appeared out of nowhere and cut me down. And I said, what did you think about the timing of that incident? He said it was a miracle. I said, did you get the feeling that someone or something was watching out for you? He said, yes. I asked him who? He said, God. I asked him, do you believe in God? He said, yes. Did you make any other suicide attempts? He said, yes. I asked him, what happened? He said, I tried to hang myself in my garage. What did you hang yourself with? He said, a nylon rope. I asked him, what happened? He said, the rope broke twice. I said, what is it, thick rope? He said, no, it was a regular thickness rope, but it was old. Have you ever been sent to a psych hospital? He said, yes, twice. Are you hearing voices now? He said, sometimes, but the medications keep them down. Okay, so the medications will lower them. They will weaken them, but they won't get rid of them. Okay, and the voices don't like the medications because they don't want to be weakened. They want this person as infuriated and as paranoid as they can make them, because they're generating what they call loosh, or that negative emotional energy. I asked him, can you feel the difference between the voices and your own thoughts? And he said yes. Now that's something that's very critical. If the person is going to recover from schizophrenia, they have to be able to ferret out the difference between their own voice in their own head and the voices that are coming into their head from these entities.
What is the difference?
There's a lot of difference. Because they sound the same, it's hard to differentiate them, but they're consistently negative. They're consistently anti-religious. They run these patterns that I was talking about, and 23 different patterns. So the people know that these things are no good. Those thoughts are no good. I asked him, do the medications the psychiatrists give you weaken them? He said yes. Are they still there? He said yes. Then they come through and not as voices inside me when I take the medication. He said they come through as thoughts and not as voices outside. So what he was hearing for a long time is when the voices get really strong, they move outside of their heads and they start talking to them like a discarnate entity. They can hear them right outside their head whispering to them, telling them things. That's really spooky when that
Mhm.
happens. That's really scary.
Is there any like paranormal activity associated with things like that you would see with like poltergeists, things like that, where
Oh yeah, I've
mugs
seen.
disappear, like
Yep, I've seen.
things get
They
scream across the room? Yeah,
right.
go ahead.
They
Sorry.
they they do that. I've seen one prisoner one night. He comes in for his appointment in the morning. He said the voices attacked me bad last night. I said, what happened? He said, they ripped my back open. I said, they ripped your back open. He said, yeah, you want to see? And I said, yeah, go ahead, show me. So he picked up his shirt. Here's 4 claw marks across his back, like something just went right across his back with fingernails. 4
Could he have
fingernails.
done that to himself in any
No,
way?
he couldn't. There's no way he could have done that to himself. And if any other prisoner had done that to him, there would have been more damage because they would have gotten into a fight.
Yeah.
One prisoner's not going to let another prisoner do something like that to him and get away with it. That would be against all the rules.
And how did the warden react to this?
The warden never knew about it. He never told anybody. The warden isn't aware of any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The warden is just keeping the yard under control, trying to keep people from killing each other, and trying to keep the yard under some kind of control. He's constantly fighting on the gangs and trying to keep them down, trying to keep drugs out of the prison. He's got his hands full. He's not worried about that. He wanted us to kind of take care of that, to take care of the people who were psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him if his voices were still there, and he said they come through his thoughts, not his voices outside when I take the medicine. So he's saying when he takes those psych drugs, they stop talking to him from outside his head and they speak to him from inside his head.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, they're always telling him negative stuff. I asked him, can you tell the difference between the thoughts, your thoughts, and their thoughts? He said yes, but he says sometimes it's confusing. And it is confusing. It's very confusing. Yeah, they do. They use the power of your own life force to do you physical damage. Right? So I asked him, what do they tell you when you're on your meds and they're not coming from outside your head? They tell me that people are out to get me and that these people want to hurt me. Right? So again, they're creating the paranoia. And when you're off your meds and you listen to what they're saying, they're telling you to do, how do they behave when you do something that you tell them to do and get in trouble for it? Then they start laughing at me and tell me I'm stupid. So they tell these people to do stuff, and when they get in trouble with it, they start mocking them and putting them down for doing it. And the worst case of that, I've heard of it twice, is where they would tell somebody, if you gouge out your eye, we will shut up and we won't ever come back. The patient gouge out that eye, and the first thing they do is they come back and they start mocking him and laughing at him and telling him how stupid he is for listening to them, and now that he's a freak and he's going to be
maimed for life, basically.
For life, right? So that this is the kind of entities these things are. So he said they laughed at him. They told him he was stupid. When they actually listen to and do what the voices tell them, they do. That's what they do. For doing what they told you in the first place, they laughed and mocked you. He said, yeah. And what do you think these voices are? And who do you think they are? He said, I don't know. What is your gut? I asked him, what's your gut impression about what these things are? He said, demons. Okay. So this was, that was just one transcript from one of the prisoners I worked with. I have another one here it's a few pages long. I don't know if what I can do is read this poem written by this psychotic killer and then go to that other one if you want, unless you have any questions.
Yeah, let's stop right there because there is one question, and I don't want to derail you because it's a really interesting question. but just try to answer it really quick and then move on. It was an earlier question that I wanted to wait for the right time. So here it is. So I'm bringing in kind of UFOs, UAPs into the discussion. But does Jerry feel that aliens are demons? How does he see the UFO UAP phenomena?
No, I don't think that aliens are demons. Although some of them just kind of, they look at us like we look at rabbits or something like that. They're not. They may not be. Intentionally harmful. They might be
They just
experimenting with stuff.
Yeah, they're just like peeling back, ripping wings off of flies. Just that they don't really, kind of don't really care whether or not they harm you.
Well, for the most part, they've been pretty innocuous. These ships are appearing everywhere. Now there's people who get abducted.
There's another narrative you don't hear in the mainstream. Like you've heard cattle mutilations and things like that.
But I also heard
incidents.
that it was us doing that. It was the deep state doing that. Part of it, because one guy actually saw special forces actually cutting up one of his cows once.
Oh, really? Yeah. I've heard that narrative. I've heard that narrative as well. But they found. I just did another one. It looked like the interview hasn't appeared yet. It's a place called Marley Woods, which is kind of like Skinwalker Ranch, only creepier. And one guy, left his horse for a second in the stall and came back, and it looked like it had been in a microwave oven. Like there were just horse flesh everywhere. And nobody went into this place. He had eyes on it the whole time. So, but there have been incidents like that, particularly in South America, where humans have been mutilated in a similar fashion.
There was one guy that was talking about them taking kids. But then there's another one where it was this special forces guy that came upon these people in South America where they were trafficking children and women in a anti-gravity machine. He told that story, and that so I guess they're good and bad, I guess, like we are. They're not all bad. Some
I'm not suggesting that. It's just there's a narrative that, just like the death of the petrodollar, which happened last Sunday, that's just suppressed. You don't hear about it, but there are more incidents out there than you would typically think.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the second question, this is more self-reflective, and then we can go into. So, a question for Jerry: how do you stay sane dealing with these patients and entities? Spiritual, practical tips for people close to schizophrenics. Thank you.
Well, you got to have a strong spiritual background. Realize that there is a God out there. There are guardian angels out there, and they're watching over you. Because in all the years that I've worked with these people, and some of them were very, very dangerous people, I've never been hurt. I remember one time where I was talking to this one schizophrenic girl, and in the middle of the conversation, she just breaks in and she goes, "You're never going to get hurt," and it didn't make any sense in terms of what we were talking about. And I said, "Where did that come from?" And she said, "I see this giant angel standing behind you." And I went, "That's good. That's a good thing." So now that doesn't mean I wasn't attacked by these things, because matter of fact, in one of this other story here, I could feel them attacking me. I mean, I could feel them attacking me. It was this strange, icky electrical feeling. It's the closest thing you'd ever kind of feel was, when you get goose pimples and the hair on your arm stands up, but it didn't feel exactly like that. So when they were angry at me, the voices, and dealing with people in the emergency room, I could feel this feeling, and I could tell how strong they were based on what that feeling was. And there were times where I felt that whatever this was pushing in on me. It was like on Star Trek where they had that force field outside. I felt that this thing was pushing in on my force field, and I could feel it. And I always wondered what would happen if my force field gave out. What would happen if
it was just like two magnets that you're trying to push to each other? You feel something? Maybe, I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Well, it was more like I was being attacked by this energy, and it was energy, and it felt like almost like electrical energy. How did I stay sane? I read a lot of spiritual books. I read a lot of like Manuel Swedenborg, Christian mystic. I read Carlos Castaneda. I'm kind of like a spiritual astronaut, a psychonaut. I just
without the DMT.
Without the DMT. I would fly. I would hike. I would ride motorcycles. Garden. I mean, you have to break away from it because it does get to you after a while. So you have to have a strong spiritual background. You got to understand that something is watching out for you.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next letter, and if you could provide context, because the context you provided to me beforehand was pretty creepy.
Yeah. So what this is this mother contacted me one day, and she was just a mess. And I listened to her story, and it was a pretty remarkable story. I got her story on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. It's Janine Florum. So you can go to the video section, and her story with me interviewing her with people is on there, and it's pretty eerie. Right? So her son almost killed her. He murdered two drug addicts that were dealing with him. I guess the drug deals went bad, and he also murdered his girlfriend and cut her up into little pieces. And they never found her entire body. So he's locked up on a maximum security unit in Colorado right now in isolation, and he's very dangerous. The voice that he has completely taken him over. Right. And
when did you get this letter?
His mother sent it to me. I don't remember what it was. Maybe a year ago, 2 years ago.
Okay.
Right. So he wrote this poem, and he labeled it "There Is a Monster." Now I may have some trouble reading it because it looks like it was written in pencil, and there were sections of it that kind of fade out. So he writes, "There is a monster that lives in my head. This monster is real. It's not under my bed. My monster tells me things to do. It tells me sometimes when the news is new. My monster is crying as it spent all the years drowning out my courage and disposing my fears. My monster is strong. That's what I like to think. My monster is coming when it's time to drink." So apparently it got worse when he was drinking. My monster is ready. My monster is strong. What will I do when my monster is gone? My monster will never leave. That is his plan. It overwhelms me when I am making a stand. There is a monster inside of me. I thought I was strong. How could this be? My monster has a name. He walks in the dark whispering Yahoo. My monster is watching me. He won't tell you my name. He won't tell you my name. His
It's almost like he's confusing himself with the monster. So I'm
well,
assuming he means the monster's name.
he is
He's
the
like
monster.
melding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're joined together at the hip at this point. His heart is heavy. He plays for the game. My monster is awake. He wants to be monster. He's as blood from a lake. His bond is with me. Now monster. He has nothing else to do. My monster's aware. Okay. So this was the monster that told him to murder his girlfriend. Okay. Now I got another one here. It's like a rough draft of a story of a patient I worked with, and I don't even remember it. So I wrote it, but I don't remember it. I can read it if you'd like.
Yeah, definitely, and provide context too before as well.
Okay. Let me take a swig first. So I haven't seen this in several years. Matter of fact, I just pulled up a booklet with. I have all these stories. I have hundreds. I should write them up and publish them. So I haven't seen this. I don't see a date on it even. So it's decades old. Okay. Psychanics. So I was working in the emergency room of hospitals at the time this took place because it wasn't in the prison or I wouldn't have been talking about a psychanics. So I named it Sarah for some reason. And I'm writing, I said, a giant of a man with eerily crazed eyes looked in my eye, eerily crazed look in his eye came through the door of the psychanics. He towered over his police escorts. As I studied him, the look in his eyes reminded me of Charles Manson. Even brief contact with his eyes was sufficient to send female staff creeping toward the protection of the office area. As I read through the police documentation, I saw that he had a diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia and a history of refusing medications. I read his medical record number, or I fed his medical record number into the computer and found that he had been psychiatrically hospitalized previously. Records indicated that he was hearing two voices, one very powerful male and one female, who upon last admission he had reported were trying to help him. After learning all I could from the record, I called him into the interview room and seated him where a closed-circuit camera could keep an eye on him. I made sure he was not between me and the door. He outweighed me by at least 50 pounds. As we sat down, he leaned menacingly forward and stared piercingly at me with those mansion eyes. I sensed he was hearing voices and decided to come right out and ask him. I said, "Are you hearing voices?" He said, "Yes." "Are you hearing them right now?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "What are they telling you?" He leaned forward out of his chair and just stared straight into my eyes with hypervigilance. I watched his every move. I knew that if I showed any fear, I'd had lost. He would have control. I met his stare with a steady gaze. His eyes were like deep black caverns. I could feel like I was gazing into the eyes of a savage beast. What are they telling you? I repeated. All right. I think I said, well, okay, I'll tell you what they're telling you. What they're telling you. They're telling you that they're running me down. They're telling you I'm no good. I'm worthless. What are they telling you? I repeat. Oh, okay. No, he's saying that. A lot of times when they wouldn't tell me, I would tell them what the voices were saying, and they would be shocked. They'd be, "How did you know that? How could you possibly know that? Nobody knows that." Because they tell these same things to everybody. You're no good. You're rotten. You're stupid. And what they'd say about me is, I'm stupid. I'm crazy. Don't listen to me. Leave the office. It was all the same stuff. It was repetitive. So he did answer the question. And when I asked him, the second time, what are they telling you? He said, they're running me down. They're telling me I'm no good. I'm worthless, and that I should kill myself. Sometimes they tell me I should kill other people, but so far I haven't listened to them. I said, how many do you hear? He said, one strong one. And I asked, male or female? Because they could be male or female. He said it was a male. I said, is he telling you not to take your medicines also? He said, yes. He's doing that because the medication's weakening him, I said. The man goes silent. He sits and he leans closer to me with a savage look. Feels like the voice is looking through his eyes and staring at me with a burning hatred. And I said, the voices don't like me. They don't like me at all. This is what it's going to do if you decide to stay here and speak with me. First of all, it's going to tell you that I'm crazy, that I'm full of shit, not to listen to me or anything I say. If you decide to stay here and listen to what I have to tell you, they're going to tell you to leave the room and leave the office, or try to leave the hospital. I told them, if you try to leave the room, I'm not going to stand in your way. You're free to go. I won't cause you any trouble. If you try to leave the hospital, you won't be able to. You won't get past the steel locked doors. If you decide to stay here and listen, the voice at some point will tell you to attack me. The man sits back in his chair and studies me warily. It looked like he reminded me of a cobra in a glass cage. Yeah. And I asked him, I said, after the voice comes and leaves, how do you feel? He said, drained and depressed. I don't have any energy. I asked him, where does your energy go? He said, I don't know. The voice has come and gone 1,000 times over the last years, and every time it leaves, you're drained. Yet you see no connection between the voice and your being drained? He goes, no. So one of the most important things, there's two important things that these people need to know to fight back against the voices. One is that the voices are not them. They're not their thoughts. They're separate from them. They're coming in from the outside. These are separate entities. They are not who they are. I've had a number of patients ask these voices, who are you? What are you? And the voices would say, we are you. Mm-hmm. They want these people to believe that they are the voices, that those thoughts that they're putting into their minds belong to them, and that they should listen to those thoughts coming into their minds. If the patient believes that they are the voices, they're on a downhill spiral. They're going to get worse and worse and worse. If they realize they're not the voices, then they have an enemy that they can fight back against. Mm-hmm. Right? Then they can start arguing against them and going, yeah, well, you're no good. You're rotten. You're causing me all this trouble. If they believe it's them, and that's what psychiatry is pushing on these people. Yeah, your brain is broken. You're crazy. All you can do is take these drugs. The voices are hallucinations. They come from your broken brain. They come from because you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. So it's lie after lie after lie. They don't know what the frick they're talking about. And they've never taken the time to investigate. There's never been an investigation by any of them into the voices. You can't find one. Go ahead, look through the psychological literature. They don't exist. They're like the ancient Egyptian priest. We hereby declare that the voices are hallucinations because we said so, and we got a medical degree, and we're psychiatrists. They don't know their butt from a hole in the ground.
If someone wanted, like, from like some academic institution, wanted to do a serious academic study of this by going and literally just interviewing paranoid schizophrenics,
they wouldn't let them in.
But-
They wouldn't let them into the psych hospitals. They wouldn't let them into the emergency rooms. The only way you could really do that is like I did, underneath, under the what do you call it, the wire.
What if you had like a Robert Bigelow just pay the prison some sort of money and to have his people come in and
they wouldn't
provide
allow them in. They'd
personal
say
security
they
and
would
all
tell
that
them
stuff?
they would tell them it's too dangerous. We can't take the risk. We can't take the we can't have it. I think the only thing people could
What if they
probably,
did it by Zoom? What if they had interviews with these people via Zoom? Again, I'm pretty, there might be ways to
they wouldn't let Zoom in the prison.
Mhm.
They wouldn't let Zoom on the psych ward. They would not let them do it. They would have to find their own population. They'd have to get volunteers from outside. But you're not going to get. I have never, in all the years I've spent in my entire career, I have never seen a researcher in any of these institutions, in any of the psych hospitals, in any of the mental health centers, in any of the prisons, none of the private psych hospitals. Never have I seen a researcher in there. All this is coming from the universities. They don't want a cure for schizophrenia. You look what they did to the funding for it. What is it? The National Institute of Mental Health. They've cut the funding for research into schizophrenia down to a drivel. They don't make any money curing people. They make money treating symptoms, and that's what they're doing. They're just treating the symptoms. That's why they don't want MACE stuff out there. They're just totally ignoring the MACE stuff. And they showed these people at work. They went in Australia. They went to one of the universities and they showed them how well the MACE energy method worked. And they go, okay, we'll take it if you give us the patent on it. The MACE people went, no, we're not going to give you no patent. You'll take it and you'll bury it. So then they went to the Australian legislature and they showed them that it worked and said, this is what you should be using in your mental health centers. This is what you should be using in your psych hospitals and in teaching in schools. They ignored it. So it was real clear that the establishment doesn't want anything to do with a psychiatric treatment that actually works.
The question that I had was literally echoed by literally the instant I had this question appeared. I wasn't even going to say the healthcare system, but who is the institutional establishment protecting? Aside from money, this seems to go beyond money in some sense.
Well, it is beyond money. I mean, they're seeing that what they do doesn't work. It's not curing anybody. So the big thing is control, power, and money. You look at the psychiatrists. Most of the ones I worked with were fairly arrogant. It's like, we're the boss. We run the mental health system. You look at and you look at their suicide rates for psychiatrists. It's right up there with the schizophrenics. That's almost identical. So the suicide rate for psychiatrists is just a fraction of a point, more or less, different than.
Wait, they actually have suicide rates by occupation and by malady?
Yeah. Yep, you can look it up.
How, for psychiatrists, how does that compare to the general population?
It's higher.
Higher, lower?
Oh, this was written by a schizophrenic also.
Wow.
So you can see they're pretty lost, and it's there's a spectrum. There's a certain point where the voices have so much control that they're not coming back. They're not ever going to come back. Medicines, no medicines, they're not coming back. Yeah. But yeah, I have those statistics for for the suicide rate of doctors somewhere. But
And what do these entities gain by driving their patients to suicide?
suicide takes a lot of it's not easy to kill yourself. There's a lot of aggravation. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of uh, confusion. There's and who knows what happens after they do kill themselves? I don't. Did they become like one of the voices? I don't know. You know, are they free from the voices? But I think the voices are, for the most part, they're dead humans who were evil.
Hmm.
Who've been taken over by these things, and they're really not happy because they're slaves. There's echelons of them. They have like the ground troops. They're assigned to destroy certain people or to cause people's grief. And even Emanuel Swedenborg, the Christian mystic I spoke about before, he said everybody's got two demons assigned to them and two angels assigned to them. Now, the demons speak in words and language, just like your thoughts. They insert negative thoughts into your mind. But the guardian angels speak more in feeling, intuition, and conscience. And you have to ask them for help. They will not barge in unless you ask them. They're not allowed to. They have to have your permission. So you need to ask them for help. Okay. So yeah. Well, if you're depressed, you watch your thinking. Watch the kind of things that come into your mind. And MACE again is another. It works great for depression. So again, you can go to causisminstitute.com. Yeah.
All right. I think we have about 10 minutes left. So if folks have specific questions now, I've been interspersing a few here and there, but if you want to ask some questions to Jerry, Jerry, you're open to
Sure.
answering some
Go
questions
for
from
it.
Peanut Gallery. All right. Well, while we're waiting, I think for kind of the first question, because usually there's a delay between the time that I open it up and people actually start asking. What should people do if their loved one is beset by these things? In addition to the Causis Institute and Causism Institute and referring them to the MACE method, what else can they do?
Well, like I said, they have to. I would send them to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Okay, there's scores of videos there that will educate them about, people who've heard voices, who've recovered from voices. That's on there. What they are, how they operate. But like I said, the first thing the patient needs to realize that those thoughts coming into his head did not belong to him. There's something else putting those thoughts in their head, and that happens with all of us. How many people I've heard say, "Well, I was driving along one day, and then I had this thought to drive into oncoming traffic, or I had this thought to jump off a bridge." Or I have the one guy wrote me. He said, "I heard your I heard your podcast," and he said, "I had this thought my boss was in front of me. He said I had this thought to spit on the back of his head." He said that would have got me fired. So
Have you ever gotten any flack? I mean, I know you certainly had flack inside the psychiatric community, but have you had flack from kind of unexpected sources? And in addition to whatever these entities are, you've given examples, I think, in the past. But any other kind of unexpected sources where you've gotten flack for proposing this view?
No. Matter of fact, it was strangely no. Um, Now, what I did is I made myself as untouchable as I possibly could. All right. So I dropped my state license because I knew they would go after it. I knew they would go after it. You know, I got when people started recovering, when schizophrenics started recovering in the prison, you know, and they have to want to work at it. It takes a lot of work to recover from schizophrenia. I mean, you can tell the person what to do, but they have to do it. You know, and MACE helps a lot, but still they have to fight against these voices. They have to realize it's not them. You know, and yeah, when they found out that schizophrenics were recovering that I was working with, the chief psychiatrist went nuts. You know, it was like, what are you doing? You're doing something you're not. This isn't supposed to happen. You're doing something that's illegal. They're doing something that it's not according to policy or something like that. So he was, because these guys were they were on psych meds, and then after the voices left, you know, they keep their appointment with the psychiatrist and said the voices are gone. I don't need these
Mhm.
meds anymore, and they're going, hey, wait a minute. No, once you have the voices, they're for life. They're forever. They don't go away. You know, there's no therapy that works on these things. So here was a psychiatrist reporting to my supervisor, this psychologist supervisor, like, you know, hey, this guy's doing something, and I don't know what it is, but these people are going off their meds. Okay, so they were trying to ask the patient, the prisoners I was working with, they were kind of pulling him aside, saying, "Well, what's he doing in there with you? Well, what's he saying? What's he doing?" And they knew what he was up to. None of them told him anything.
Mhm.
They protected me. None of them told him anything. This one guy said, "He's helping us, not like you, asshole," and that infuriated them. You know, so you know, they didn't want anybody helping these people. You know, if it was proving to help them, they didn't like it. You know, so I dropped my license because I knew if I didn't, they would dirty it up. You know, they'd say this
Mhm.
guy's crazy. They'd do something. Um, so I went and I got the MACE certification, which you know, the MACE people know all about these things. You know, they're aware of them. In many cases, they may appear to be voices, but they turn out to be negative identities. And even if they are voices, once you clear out the negative identities, these voices have much less to feed off of.
Mhm.
You know, so it helps them in either case. It may not cure them, but it makes them better.
All right. So one question from the audience: what do you think of the depiction of the hallucinations in the movie A Beautiful Mind? Are they accurate?
Well, they may be accurate, but they're rare. I've only heard of one other case like that. You know, there were some strange things were similar to that, but that's not what schizophrenia is for the
Mhm.
most part. That's fairly rare. You know, schizophrenia is usually the voices, these voices telling you all these rotten things, you know, about yourself and everybody else. And
Oh, go
any
ahead.
other questions?
Nothing from the peanut gallery. I mean the audience. I mean peanut gallery. And folks, if you're just joining us, I think I missed another mark. So you're listening to Through Glass Darkly Radio on United Public Radio, and here I'm here talking with psychoanalyst, retired psychoanalyst Jerry Marzinsky.
I'm not a psychoanalyst. That's a whole different category.
Yeah, well, it was
Psychotherapist.
psychotherapist. My my apologies. We're talking about the uh, paranoid schizophrenia and what may be the cause of that. Any Final words of wisdom. We have 3 minutes, so you have plenty of time to opine.
These things are entities. They are not hallucinations. Now, if you go to my website, you go to articles, you will see this list of patterns there. You can see them for yourself. It's not like, oh, this is genetics. You can't see it. You got to trust us. Or this is a biochemical imbalance. Just take our word for it. We're the scientists. We know everything. You can go there and you can look at this list of patterns and you can see it. If you have a schizophrenic son or daughter or family member, or you're a therapist working with schizophrenics, you can see these patterns for yourself. They're right in front of your eyes. All you got to do is see them. Once you know that these things are patterns, the patterns, hallucinations don't run patterns. So what the psychiatric mafia and the universities and the institutions and big pharma are telling you is a bunch of crap. You can see it for yourself. They run patterns. They run a set of repeatable patterns. All the time. There are 23 of them. Okay? And you can check them out with the schizophrenics yourself. Hey, what are the voices like? Are they always negative? Yeah, they're always negative. What do they do when you go to church? What do they do when you read the Bible? They go nuts. You can see it for yourself. So this is like the magnetic jar in with the magnetic iron filings. This is the operational definition of what the voices are. This is how they operate. This is what they do.
And then I think last question, do you think a high percentage of schizophrenics were drug addicts? Do you think it opens a door? I think we know the answer to the second one.
Well,
I think you answered that at length earlier. But
not especially with meth and heroin and that kind of stuff. You can be a meth addict and a heroin addict and not be psychotic or schizophrenic. But what happens is a lot of schizophrenics don't like the medicines that psychiatry gives them, and they will actually tell the patient, go out and get some meth, or go get some heroin, or get some Xanax or Librium, and at least you'll get high from those drugs. You'll feel better from those drugs, because the psych drugs make them feel awful. I mean, they're awful drugs. A dry mouth, sexual dysfunction, syrup on the brain type stuff. I mean, it's awful. It's and the voices know that. So what they do is they tell these patients that the psychiatrist is poisoning you, and they point to the negative side effects of these medications as proof. And indeed, it's true. Those medications are, with long-term use, they are toxic. They will slowly destroy the peripheral nervous system and the brain. And long-term patients in psych hospitals, where they found out, they were doing autopsies on long-term schizophrenics, and they were seeing that their brains were shrunk like shrunken prunes. And they're going, they were all on psych meds, and the researchers were going, well, we think this is due to the psych meds. And of course the psychiatric mafia and big pharma go, oh no, it's not the psych meds, it's the schizophrenia doing this. And so the researchers went, okay, we'll see. And they started feeding those antipsychotic drugs to monkeys, rats, and mice, and they found that it was shrinking their brain. It was causing permanent neurological damage. So they were actually making these patients worse with these drugs, using them long term.
Yeah, short term it helped mute the symptoms, but long term it just
it's short term. It's treating the symptoms. And to be honest, there's a number of patients I've worked with that I would not have been able to get through to had it not been for the drugs. I wouldn't have been able to reach them. And believe me, in the prison, there's a lot of them that are so dangerous that the only thing they can do is keep them on those drugs. But for the most part, patients aren't going to want to take those things by themselves. They have awful side effects.
Mhm. All right, Jerry. It was an absolute pleasure, and keep fighting the good fight. And you know, some scary
And
stuff out there.
here, if you want to know how we came to these conclusions, this book, you can get this book through my website, or you can get it on Amazon. It'll talk about the voices, how we came to see that they were actual entities and that they weren't hallucinations. What they said, how they acted, and what a little history of psychiatry and the crazy stuff that they were pulling off. So you can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. There's that's a live program that can be used against the voices. It will weaken the voices and sometimes get rid of them. It's under articles. And then for those of you who, believe me, before you try psychiatric drugs, go to the Causism website at causism.com and at least see a MACE therapist first before you start taking those drugs.
All right, Jerry. Always a pleasure, and talk soon.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure.